On the 29th of May, 1453, the Roman Empire ended. Not the one you're thinking of. That one is supposed to have ended 1,000 years earlier. But the eastern half never stopped. It kept crowning emperors. It kept using Roman law. And in its own documents, right up to the last morning, it called itself exactly what it had always called itself: the Empire of the Romans. By 1453, that empire consisted of one city and some scenery. Here's the part worth understanding. The empire that died that Tuesday had been functionally dead for 250 years. What happened in 1453 wasn't a collapse. It was paperwork. And the people who actually killed it weren't the Ottomans. They were Christians, on crusade, who were supposed to be helping. Let's start with what was actually left. At its height, Constantinople held something like 500,000 people. It was the largest city in Europe, the richest city in the Mediterranean, and the administrative brain of a state that stretched from Italy to Syria. By 1453, the population was somewhere around 50,000. Whole districts inside the walls had reverted to farmland. Visitors described a city of scattered villages sitting inside a ring of fortifications built for a metropolis that no longer existed. The walls were still enormous. There just wasn't much left inside them. The emperor was Constantine XI. He ruled the city, a few islands, and a strip of southern Greece. That was the Roman Empire. What he had inherited in full, though, was the ceremony. The court still performed the complete ritual, the silks, the acclamations, the protocol worked out over 1,000 years for a state that could no longer reliably pay its own garrison. That is the whole story of late Byzantium in one image. The title, immaculately maintained. The thing the title described, gone. To understand how it got that way, go back 249 years. In 1204, the Fourth Crusade set out for the Holy Land. It ran short of money. It got diverted. And it ended up outside Constantinople, the largest Christian city on earth, where it did what crusading armies did to cities they took. 3 days of sacking. They stripped the bronze off the monuments and melted it down for coin. They broke up the imperial tombs. They carried off the relics, and a great deal of what sits in St. Mark's in Venice today came out of Constantinople that week. A Christian army destroyed the Christian capital it had sailed past on its way to fight somebody else. The empire shattered into pieces. A Greek dynasty retook the city in 1261, and on paper the empire was restored. In practice, it never came back. The territory was gone. The treasury was gone. The trade, the actual engine of Byzantine wealth, was now in the hands of Venice and Genoa, operating out of the city's own harbours. For the next 2 centuries, the Roman Empire was a small, poor state with an enormous name. There was one way out, and Constantinople couldn't take it. The West would help. There was a price, and the price was the church. The Eastern and Western churches had been formally split for centuries, and Rome's terms were simple: accept the authority of the Pope, reunify the Church, and Catholic Europe sends armies. In 1439, at the Council of Florence, the Byzantine delegation signed. The emperor signed. The union was proclaimed. And Constantinople rejected it, not the court, the city. Monks preached against it in the streets. Congregations walked out of services where the union was read aloud. One of the emperor's own senior officials is supposed to have said he would rather see the sultan's turban in the middle of the city than the cardinal's hat. You can call that suicidal pride. You can also call it a fairly clear-eyed assessment of what had happened the last time a Western army turned up, offering to help. Either way, the help that came was a fraction of what had been promised, and it came late. A few Venetian ships, Giustiniani's Genoese, a small papal contingent, not an army. The wealthiest state in Christendom spent its final decade asking for rescue and being told the price was the one thing it would not sell. Now the other side. Mehmed II was 21 years old. He had been sultan once before as a child and had been pushed aside and handed back to his tutors. He returned to the throne as a young man with something to prove, and he had picked his target before he picked anything else. He also had a piece of luck that history has never stopped enjoying. An engineer named Orban, a cannon founder from the Hungarian lands, arrived at Constantinople offering to build the emperor the largest gun ever made. Constantine could not pay him. The treasury simply did not have it. So Orban went to Mehmed, who paid him roughly 4 times what he had asked. The gun he built was about 27 feet long. It fired stone shot weighing over half a ton. It needed a crew of hundreds to move and hours to reload, and it could only manage a handful of shots a day. It didn't need to be quick, it needed to be big. The weapon that broke the walls of Constantinople had been offered to Constantinople first. The siege began on the 6th of April, 1453. Inside the walls, roughly 7,000 men, and a significant number of them weren't Byzantine at all. Several hundred were Genoese, under a professional soldier named Giovanni Giustiniani, who had come at his own expense. Outside, somewhere between 50 and 80,000. The sources disagree, and the medieval numbers are almost certainly inflated. But nobody disputes the ratio. The defenders were outnumbered somewhere between 7 and 11 to 1. They were holding the Theodosian walls, a triple line of fortification built in the 5th century, and for 1,000 years the single most successful piece of defensive architecture in the world. Armies had been arriving outside those walls and giving up for a millennium. The Byzantines also had the Golden Horn, the harbour, sealed with an enormous iron chain strung across its mouth. The Ottoman fleet couldn't get in, so Mehmed went around it. He had roughly 70 ships hauled overland, on greased timber rollers, over the hill behind Galata, and put them into the harbour on the other side of the chain. That is not a metaphor. He physically moved a navy over a hill. Then 6 weeks of bombardment. The great gun would fire, the wall would break, and the defenders would repair it overnight, again and again and again, with fewer men each time. The final assault came before dawn on the 29th of May. Mehmed sent it in waves. The irregulars first, to exhaust the defence, then the Anatolian regiments, then last the Janissaries, the professional corps of the Ottoman army. The defence held longer than the numbers say it should have. What broke it was one wound. Giustiniani, commanding at the most contested section, was hit and carried off the wall. His men watched their commander leave the line, and the section wavered, and that was enough. According to the sources, a small postern gate called the Kerkoporta was found unbarred, and Ottoman troops got inside the circuit. Whether that detail is literally true or a story told afterwards to explain a catastrophe, historians still argue. Constantine XI, by the account we have, pulled off the imperial regalia so that he would not be recognized, and went into the fighting as an ordinary soldier. His body was never identified. The last Roman emperor is, as far as anyone knows, still in the city. Mehmed entered Constantinople that afternoon and rode to Hagia Sophia, a church that had been standing for over 900 years and was still, at that point, the largest enclosed space human beings had ever built. He ordered it converted to a mosque. Then he took a title for himself, Kaiser i Rum, Caesar of Rome. He did not think he had destroyed the Roman Empire. He thought he had inherited it. The consequences went a long way past the city. Greek scholars who got out went west, carrying manuscripts that Western Europe had not read in centuries, and walked into the middle of the Italian Renaissance. And the overland trade routes to Asia now ran through Ottoman territory, on Ottoman terms, which gave every merchant nation on the Atlantic coast a very expensive reason to start wondering whether you could get to Asia by sea instead. 40 years after Constantinople fell, that question put Columbus on a boat. So here's where this lands. Augustus worked out that you could hold all the actual power and leave the titles sitting on the table. And it kept him alive to 75. Constantinople spent its last 2 centuries proving the reverse. You can keep the title long after the power is gone. You can hold the ceremony, the law, the name, the unbroken line back to Caesar. And none of it stops 50,000 people in a city built for 500,000. The Ottomans didn't end the Roman Empire. They took the name off a building that had been empty for a very long time. Constantinople kept the title for 2 centuries after it stopped holding the power. Augustus did the exact opposite. He took all the power and left the titles sitting on the table. If you want to know which of those is the better trade, subscribe. New episode every week.